My name is Joseph L. Lewis. Well, I was born in a little town in Indiana called Elwood. And I don't know if you people know where Elwood's at, but it's about 40 miles north of Indianapolis. And how I designate it to other people, it's a town where Wendell Willkie was born. Now, I know you're all Democrats, so you don't know nothing about Wendell Willkie. He was a Republican. But anyway, I was born in Elwood, and I went to school to the 6th grade. And then we moved out in the country, and we moved into Tipton County. And that put me in a little school, a little country school. It was in Curtisville. And there probably was 15 or 20 people maybe, or maybe 30 lived in this area. And we all went to school there to the 8th grade. And then after the 8th grade, I went to high school in Windfall. But I went there as a freshman, and I played basketball. And I played on the varsity from my freshman year to my senior year. I was lucky. And I graduated in 1941. And during the time that I was in high school, my sophomore year, I got acquainted with my wife. And she's 1 year older than me, and she was already out of school. So I went with her during my junior and senior year, and then after I graduated, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, we was walking down the street one night. We didn't have no cars, because in them days, most of the time if you had a date, you went with somebody else that had a car, or you walked. You walked up down to the show, and then you walked back home. You didn't have a car to run around in, and Mom and Dad to furnish the gas and the money, you know, like they do today. Anyway, we was walking down the street, and my wife said to me, she said, "Why don't we get married?" And I said, "Well, it's all right with me." So we was walking down the street, and as we was walking down the street, we looked to our left, and there was a Model A Ford coupe sitting in this Buick show window and had a sign on it, $75. She said, I said to her, I said, "You know, we ought to buy that car." I said, "How much money you got?" She said, $35. And I said, "Well, I've got $35. I said, what if I come up here Monday morning and look it over and buy it?" She said, "Fine." So Monday morning I go up and I buy this car. And I bought it, and I thought, man, how am I going to drive it? I don't have no driver's license. So just across the alley was a license bureau. And I went in there, and the lady said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Yes, ma'am." I said, "I just bought a car over Dawson Buick." And I said, "I got to looking and I lost my driver's license." Well, she said, "That's no trouble." She just wrote me out a new set, charged me $1.50, and away I went. So I got this car and I went home. And I lived out in the country, and when I drove in the driveway, my dad had come home from work, and he was sitting out in a chair. And he said to me, "Where did you get that car?" I said, "I bought it." "How did you buy that car? You don't have no money." Well, I said I had a little money saved up, and I said, "Mary Jane, give me the rest." He said, "You mean to tell me you took that poor girl's money and went and bought a car with it?" And I said, "Yeah." So I guess down the road we finally got married, and that's about the end of my story till I went into the service.
Any brothers and sisters?
I have one brother. He passed away. He had lung cancer. He was 3 years younger than me. I don't have any sisters.
Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Huh?
When you heard?
Well, after I got married, I can't remember what day it was, but it seemed to me like it was Sunday. And we were coming back from Tipton, which is about 15 miles from Elwood. We went over there and went to show with another couple, and we was all four in the car. And we was riding along, and it come on the radio that Pearl Harbor had been. Well, I didn't think much about it, you know. But then, right after that, in a matter of about a month or two, they drafted me into the United States Army. But I had a good job. Once I got out of school, I got a job working for Continental Can Company. I was a maintenance man there, and it was a pretty decent job. In fact, I think it was the best job I ever had. But I worked 40 hours a week for $18 and something. And I worked a double shift so I could make more money. And that's about the end of my life till I got drafted in the Army.
Can you go through that procedure about getting drafted into the Army? How did you find out?
Well, they sent me a letter in the mail, and they told me to be in Alexandria at certain date at certain time and get on a train and go to Indianapolis at Camp Atterbury, and that's where they induct you.
What was that experience like?
Well, I'd never been in the Army, and so there was 8 guys from Elwood that went in this Army at the same time, from the same town, 8 of us. So we go down to Indianapolis, and it was new. They took us in this barracks and give us a bed, and we sat there for a while, and they said, we need 3 guys to work KP in the kitchen. So they picked me and a couple other guys, and we went in there, and all we done all day long was peel potatoes. And that was my first experience in the Army. So after we decided, or they decided, we're going to have lunch or supper. So they put all this stuff out in like big long tables, and the guys walked through, and each one of us put something on their plate. One guy'd put potato, next guy'd do this or whatever they had until you get down at the other end, you got your coffee, and that was the end of it. So this one guy that was from my hometown, he was a roughneck. I mean, he wasn't afraid of nothing. So he's standing there putting them potatoes on everybody's plate with his hand. And this sergeant come along, and he seen him doing it. He said, "Private, there's a fork laying there beside them potatoes," and he said, "if I see you put one more potato on somebody's plate with your hands, you're going to wish you didn't know me." He said, "You take this fork, and this is what you do it with." And this fella, his name was Slayton, he said to this sergeant, "As soon as I get through putting these potatoes on the plates, if you'll step outside," he said, "I'll show you a few things that you don't know." And the sergeant said, "We'll just go outside right now." So I never seen Hub for several hours, but when I did, he was going down with a street with a wheelbarrow. I don't know where he was going, but that sergeant, he worked him for 3 or 4 days. After that, they shipped us from Indianapolis by train to Vancouver Barracks in Washington. And we got there, and they put us in tents. They put 7 guys in a tent and a stove in the middle. And after we got there, well, they called us out, and of course we go in and start this procedure, having drills and doing all this, but I found out that it was a bakery company. What this company did was bake bread for the soldiers. If you went overseas, you baked bread for the hospitals. So this company I was in, all they did was bake bread. And they done it from scratch. They had mixing machines where they put the dough in and all the stuff, the ingredients to make the bread. Then they had a machine that done the mixing, and then they put them in these great big ovens like they do pizzas now. And they put it in pans and put it in these ovens, and they'd bake it. Well, these ovens had stoves. They were about this wide and about, probably that long or a little longer. And they slipped in there, you lit them, they were gas, you poured gas in them and you lit them like you do a lawnmower. And then you push them in the furnace, or in the oven, and there was 2 went in the oven, and that's what baked the bread. So they made me a T5 corporal, and I was a mechanic on these stoves. These stoves had to be cleaned every day and made ready to go in the ovens the next day. And then we had extras. If one of them went out, we'd pull it out, set it over here till it cooled, let it cool, and we'd put in another stove. And this was the way we baked our bread. So we went on like that, and of course we had inspections and drills and all kinds of stuff. And so in the meantime, before I went in the Army, my wife got pregnant. So while I was in the Army, I got a furlough. First one I've had since I've been in, and this is probably almost a year. So I went home. And while I was home, she's supposed to have this child, and when it come time for me to go back to the Army, she hadn't had it yet. So I went to the Red Cross, and they gave me an extension. So about a week later, she had it. She had a little girl, and so I stayed home the rest of that week when I was supposed to, and then I went back. Well, when I got back, the company commander come down there and he said, "You're in a barrel of trouble." He called me in the order room. He said, "You're in trouble." And I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Well, you're late. You're a week late." He said, "You're supposed to be here last week." And he said, "We don't tolerate that." And I said, "Sir, if you'll contact the Red Cross, you'll find out that they gave me an extension." Well, he said, "Nobody told me about it." Well, I said, "I'm sorry that happened, but the thing you got to do is get a hold of the Red Cross and straighten it out." Well, he said, "I'll do that." So in a few days, he come down and told me, he said, "Everything's all right." I said, "You just forget it." So I stayed in this company for I don't know how long, maybe another 3 or 4 weeks, and one morning they called us out and said, "We're shipping overseas." So we got ready, and they put us on a train. They put us on a troop train from Oregon to New York. If you think that ain't a good trip, on a troop train from the West Coast to the East Coast.
What were the conditions like on the train?
Well, nothing fancy. And they had food on there.
Sorry about that.
When they'd stop in certain towns, nobody got off the train. You wasn't allowed to get off. You could roll your window up and holler at people or wave or something like this, but to get off the train, you could not do that. So we go to New York, and they'd take us to this big place, and we were there probably 24 hours. And then they took us down and put us on a ship. And I mean, this ship was loaded. It had, I don't know how many troops on it, plus it had a lot of waves on it. That's women that was in the Army. At that time, they called them waves, and they were all women. And they're all the waves in the Army is commissioned. Most of them's lieutenants, captains, and there's no privates. So this ship, if a torpedo would have hit that ship, I don't think anybody would have ever got off of it because it was loaded. So they didn't tell us where we was going. But I got up on deck in the daytime, and I was, as far as I could look, there were ships all the way around me. So I said to one of the sailors, I said, well, how's come all these ships around us? He said, well, we got about 6 or 8 ships with troops on it. The rest of them is ships is guarding us. They looked for torpedoes, looked for trouble. And we never had a bit of trouble. We went right over there and we landed at Oran, Africa. And they took us down by trucks to this great big field. I mean, it was an enormous place. And they had tents all over this place. And this is where we lived. Well, we stayed there a few days, and I thought we was going to set up and bake bread. So the commander called us out, and he said, we're not going to bake no bread for the time being. We're going to be transferred to a trucking company. So they put us in this trucking company. And so I go down to the trucking company, and I see a sign on the board that says they wanted semi-drivers. So I put my name down. So next day, the lieutenant calls me in, and he said, I said, I'm still a T5. I'm not at the corporal, really. So he said, called me in there, and he said, Corporal, he said, what kind of experience have you got driving a semi? Oh, I said, my dad owned 4 or 5 of them. I said, I've drove semis for I don't know how long. Well, he gave me a job right now. He took me down, and he said, here's a brand new auto car. He said, starting tomorrow night, you're going to be on nights, and you're going to be driving that auto car. It's going to be yours. Yours to take care of. You got to keep it clean. You got to keep it gassed. You got to keep it serviced. It's yours.
Was that true that your dad owned 4 trucks?
Huh?
Was it true that your dad owned 4 trucks?
No. I'd never seen a semi, but I always wanted to drive one. So I had a buddy that was already driving in this company. So he said to me, his name was Taylor, and he worked nights. He said, you just come ride with me a couple nights. He said, after 2 or 3 nights, he said, it'll be a piece of cake for you. So I rode with him for a couple, 3 nights, and the next day, I started out on days to start with, and they sent me down to the freight yards to unload a boxcar. These little French boxcars, it was about just a little bigger, wider than this, and maybe just a little longer, but not very long. They're little bitty things. So I drove this truck down there and backed into this boxcar, and when I did, I got too close to it and knocked it off the track. Well, nobody said anything. The sergeant, he had guys there, and another thing about driving a truck in the Army, all you do is drive it. You do not handle nothing. So he said, hey, don't worry about it. There ain't nobody going to know it but me and you. I ain't going to say nothing to anybody. He said, that could happen to anybody. So I drove a couple of days like that, and one day I go to work, and there's a lieutenant standing there, and he said, Corporal, he said, today I'm going to ride with you. I want to see how good you are. I said, oh boy, here we go, I'm in trouble. So we go down to a warehouse, and we're going to load some stuff and take it to another warehouse. So we go down there, and that door looked to me like it wasn't any wider than that. and I have to back this truck in that warehouse. So I just started backing it in there, and with a lot of luck, it went right in, and I never had a minute's trouble. And we loaded the truck, and the lieutenant said to me, we get down to the warehouse, he said, I'm going to be leaving you. He said, you got no problems. And I did this for quite a while. I probably did it for 2 or 3 months. And then I went to work. I was working nights, and I went to work, and I seen a sign that said they wanting Jeep drivers to drive colonels. A colonel lives in a fancy hotel, and you go get him and you take him places, and if he gets drunk, you take him and put him in bed, and you take his shoes off, and you're really his baby, you know? So I signed it. So they called me in, they said, you got the job. And they give me a brand new Jeep, and they sent me down to this place to meet this colonel. And I went down there and parked the Jeep, went in, saluted him, and he said, so you're going to be my new driver. And he could say good morning, and your hat would go up and down. That's how his voice was. You'd think your hat was going up and down. He had the awfulest voice. He could scare you just by talking to you. So.
Do you remember his name?
No, I don't. At this time, I can't tell you. I was 19 years old, and man, I was having a ball in the Army. I didn't care about nothing. I knew I was going to be in there. I was overseas. I didn't know when I was going to get home. I didn't pay attention to nothing. I just enjoyed myself. Well, I started driving this colonel around. I'd always go get him about 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening, and he'd go to a nightclub, and I'd pick him up a certain time. He'd tell me a certain time where to be. The daytime, I'd take him around certain places where he wanted to inspect stuff and talk to people. But anyway, I got acquainted with this colonel real well. So I'd take him someplace, and then I'd have the Jeep. I could ride around town or do anything I wanted to do. So I had a buddy that was an MP, and he rode a motorcycle. And every time I'd see him, I'd make him chase me and catch me. So one night, I took this colonel to a dance. And after the dance, I'm riding around town, I look in the mirror, and here comes this guy on a motorcycle. So I just take off. I try to slip him. Well, he finally catches me, and when he did, he was not the guy that was my friend. And he gave me a ticket. And he took the Jeep away from me. So I got back down to that nightclub, and I got a hold of this colonel. I told him what happened. So he got another person with a Jeep to take us down to the place where they had it put up. They put it in a compound, what they call. So we go down there, and we're in this command car that colonels ride in. It's a big fancy outfit. And we drive up to this compound to see about where my Jeep's at and how to get it out. And there's a private at the gate. And he's standing there looking around and ignoring everybody. And that colonel got out of the car, and he didn't pay no attention to him. He walked up to that guy and he said, do you know who I am? He bet you talk about that guy coming, he woke up right now. Well, we finally got the Jeep out, and everything was fine. And we was riding down the street one night, and this colonel said, to me, they give me this ticket, and I was supposed to report at a certain time. They was going to find me. And he said to me, did you ever hear any more about that ticket? I said, no, sir. They told me to come up there on Saturday, but then they turned around and called me and told me that I didn't have to come. Well, he said, that's kind of funny, ain't it? And he started laughing. And we were riding down the street one day after all this happened. He said, Corporal, he said, what size shoe do you wear? I said, I wear a 7. I thought he was going to give me a new pair of shoes. He said, well, take about half of that out of the carburetor. Said, you're driving too fast. But I did this for quite a while, and finally, they called us in one day, and they said, we're busting up the company. He said, they need troops in Italy. And he said, the company's going to be busted up. He said, we got a sign on the bulletin board. You can go to the infantry or you can go to the paratroopers. That's your choice. Or you stay here and we'll put you where we want to put you. So I signed up for the paratroopers. Because a paratrooper, if you seen him walking down the street, he was something else. He looked like something that just stepped out of a bandwagon. They wore boots up to here and they sparkled. And they had fancy pants with creases in them, fancy jackets, and they got paid extra money every jump they made. So they sent me to Italy. They flew me with a bunch of other guys to Italy. And they took me in this great big place where there's nothing but one line of tents, and I expect it looked to me like it was a mile long. And they'd call you out, and you all get out and stand in line, and they'd say, count off, and you go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, till you got all the way down that line. Well, the guy next to me was out of the same company that I was in, and he was from the same town that I was from. He was one of the 8 guys that was in the company that I was in. And I said to him, Raymond, switch places with, well, by the way, before I'm getting ahead of my story, after they counted off 1, 2, 1, 2, they said, all right, all the 1s go to the 91st Infantry, and all the 2s go to the 82nd Airborne. Well, he was the number 2. And I said, Raymond, get over here and trade places with me. You don't want to go to paratroopers, you get over here. He said, no, I'm going to paratroopers. Well, he made one jump and he ended up in the kitchen. He couldn't handle it. They made a cook out of him. And I ended up in the 91st Infantry. That's about the end of it. I got in that infantry, and I mean to tell you, it was the meanest place I ever was in my life. Those guys were mean. They had the idea that they was never going to get back home, and they were mean. And when I first got in the 91st Infantry, I wasn't in there 2 days till President Roosevelt sent a letter to the 5th Army that the 91st Division quit. They wouldn't take no prisoners. They'd take them back and shoot them. They took no prisoners. If they got 6 or 8 Germans, then they got rid of them. And he sent a letter, no more of this. And the Germans was scared of the 91st Infantry because they knew what was going to happen. When you'd capture one, he didn't start give you any problems because he knew if he did what was happening, see. So I captured a German lieutenant one time, and he had a motorcycle with a sidecar on it. I drove that sidecar for 3 days, and the first sergeant says, Lewis, you got to leave that motorcycle here. We're moving out in about an hour, and you're walking. You're not riding. You leave that motorcycle there. I said, Sergeant, I found that motorcycle. It's mine. I want to take it home with me. So I stayed in the 91st all the time that I was overseas, which was 3 years. And one time we was digging in a foxhole, and it was getting just about dark. And all the time there's shells flying. You never knowed where they was going to land. You could hear them, but you never knew where they was going to hit. And me and this other guy were in the foxhole, And I had my rifle laying, because we was digging the hole deeper so we could get, and one of the shells landed and blowed the stock off of my gun, and a splinter hit me in this finger. That's the reason it's got a hump on it today. And I never paid no attention to it. I just kind of went like that and went along with it. See that knot on it? And it went along for 3 or 4 days, and I started hurting up here. So I went to First Sergeant, and I said, hey, I got a problem. So what's the matter? I said, this finger's swelled up, and I said, it got hit the other day. And I said, my arm's bothering me. He said, now you just want to go to the hospital, don't you? And I said, no, not really. I just want to tell you what it is. If you want to send me, fine. If you don't, I'll forget it. So he said, well, I'm going to send you to, they called a hospital infirmary. Said, I'm going to send you to the infirmary and see what's wrong with you. So I went to the infirmary and they put me in the hospital. And I was in the hospital for, probably a month. This guy next to me in bed said, now I'll tell you something. When that nurse comes along and puts that thermometer in your mouth and she leaves to come back, she'll be back in a little bit, stick it under your arm, and he said it'll go up, man, it'll go up, and they'll think you got a temperature and they'll leave you in here. So I'd done that for a while, and I stayed in that hospital for a couple of weeks till I finally got healed up. So when I got healed up, they put me in a trucking company. And I'm driving troops up the front every night, taking troops up and bringing the truck back empty. It's snowing over there, ice. I mean, snow, the roads, you can't hardly do nothing. In Italy, it was terrible that winter. Cold, you won't believe how cold it was. So, I got the truck stuck coming back. And I'm out there digging and trying to get this truck out. And one of these command cars come along, and there's a bunch of officers in it. Well, General Montgomery was over the 5th Army. Well, these officers got out, and they're helping me push this truck out, and I'm giving the Army the devil, and I'm going on about it, and I'm giving the generals. And finally, we got the truck out, and this guy turned around to me and shook my hand. He said, I'm General Montgomery, and he said, I'm glad I could be of some help to you, and I could have went through that floor if I could have got through it. But then after a while, they put me back in the infantry. They called me in and said, hey, your first sergeant wants to know where you're at. He wants you up front immediately. So they sent me back up front. And so then I got back in the same outfit I was in, the same company, the same squad. And I had a sergeant in the squad. When I first got in there, I was a scout. If the platoon is walking down the road, there's always a lieutenant with them. And he'd have the scouts go up front and see if anything's going on, see if it's safe for the rest of them to come up. Well, that was my job for a long time. I did that. So it went on for a while, and we had attacked a mountain, and they took, I don't know how many troops they took up there to take this mountain, but when they did, I don't know how many of us was in a line, but we started up this hill, and then they started shooting and going on, and I remember that me and the lieutenant and the radio man was the only 3 guys that come back. That's how they was waiting.
How many men?
Well, they started out to take this mountain with a battalion, which you're looking at 6 or 7 companies. I don't know what went on the right and left of me, but I know that our company, They wiped us out. Boy,
How
they
many men are in a company then?
okay, there is, a company is made up of 4 squads, and there's 12 men in a squad. So that's 48 guys there, plus there's a lieutenant and a tech sergeant. Each squad has a staff sergeant. He controls 11 guys. There's 12 of you together. He's responsible for 11 guys. He takes care of them. He tries to keep from, not getting them in trouble and all this. So we come back, and they sent up replacements. They sent replacements up, and we started you might well say, a new company. But anyway, we went on for about a week, and one day the lieutenant called me in, and he said, Corporal, he said, I got some good news for you. I thought, oh boy, he's going to send me home. He said, starting tomorrow, you're going to be a sergeant, and you're going to be over the 4th squad. And he said, I'm promoting you. And I said, I don't need that. Give it to somebody else. I said, I'm fine the way I am. He said, no, I've been watching you. And he said, you're the guy for the job. Well, he made me a sergeant just like that. So we won on a few stuff and a few attacks and stuff. And so finally, he started sending me and my squad on night patrols. And we'd wait till after dark, and then we'd go on night patrols, and this lieutenant would go with us. And he'd have a map where what he's going to do and all this stuff, and we wouldn't get back maybe till daylight. Well, maybe we didn't get started back in daylight. Them P-38s would come over, and they'd think we was Germans, and they'd shoot at us. And we'd have to get behind bushes and lay on the ground and everything till we get across the line. After you get back on your side, well, they don't bother you. But if they catch you over behind the lines, they shoot at you. They shoot at their own people because they didn't know you. Mm-hmm. And we go on night patrols. And one patrol I went on, I'll never forget it if I lived to be 100. It was, what's going on this night patrol? They come in and said, Lewis, we're going on a night patrol tonight. And they said, we got to get ready for it now. And it was snowing out. I mean, it was snowing, and the snow was deep. So they give us white pants, white jackets, white hats. We looked like Ku Klux Klan, really. Looked like a Klan do when they're dressed up. And we painted our guns white, and we went on this night patrol. Well, it's been snowing out, and part of it, where we was going, had a path. And then we went down here for a while, and it got wide, and if you'd step, you'd go in the mud up to your shoes, because it was thawing. It's snowing, but it's thawing. So we're walking down through this place, and the moon's out, and I looked to my right, and there was a machine gun over there with 2 Germans in it, and they was asleep. So we just snuck right on by them. We go up this house, and they got gunny sacks over the windows, and these Germans are sitting around a table playing cards. And I said to these guys, I'll tell you what, if we try to take these guys and we wake them 2 guys up down there with that machine gun, we're going to be in barrel trouble. Let's just get out of here and forget this. I don't know if we're doing the right thing, but this is a decision I'm going to make. Let's get out of here. Let's go back. So we're going back. We get about 3 or 4 feet past this machine gun, and those guys wake up and they start shooting at us. And we start running. And we'd run a while, then we'd lay down in the mud a while. And I run out of my shoes. I lost both of them. And I went the rest of the way home without any shoes. I don't know how far it was, but the next morning, my feet were swelled up so bad I couldn't. That first sergeant, he said, well, we're going to try to get you a pair of shoes, but he said, I don't know if you'll ever get them on or not. But that's just one of the things that I was in that I never forget.
Where did you land in Italy?
I landed, I don't know, I can't remember. I know that, I can't tell you that. When I landed in Italy, it was at night. And as soon as we got out of the airplane, they sent us to this place. And then we got, like I said, in the 91st, and they was moving up front, and we started walking. So I don't know where I was at. We walked all night. And at daylight, we attacked at a bunch of places. But we walked all night. And I don't know I do know that I was in Montecatini, and I was in Florence. I know that. And I had a vacation when I was on the front lines. I was in Rome for a week, and I was all over Rome. I seen the Leaning Tower, and I walked up them. You know, when you see on TV when where the Pope is, and them steps, I walked them steps all the way up to the top and all the way down. I seen that. I was in Rome for a week, and we got us a hotel room, and we had our meals brought up to us, and me and this other sergeant, and we really had a vacation, I'm telling you. But I remember that. Of course, there's a lot of things that I don't want to talk about, but I do want you to know that part, and that's probably I probably said too much, but.
You won't tell your wife.
But then after I was in the 91st for a while, Germans was giving up. We was capturing probably 35 and 40 at a bunch, and they just quit. They knew they were licked. So we're leaving Italy, and we're starting to get into Austria. And we just got in the front part of Austria. And one morning we had dug in this place, and I was in this foxhole with another sergeant. These sergeants kind of stuck together, and they put their squads out where they're supposed to be, and then the two sergeants would stay together. First sergeant come over there, and he said, Lewis, he said, get all your stuff together, and he said, start walking that way. He said, you'll come to a road in about half a mile, and he said, just keep walking down that road. I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I'm saying that you're going home. I want you to walk down that road. He said, you got 26 months over here, and the front office says, you got a wife and a kid, and it's time for you to go home. I said, I don't want to go home. I'll stay here. No, he said, just walk down that road. And he said, there'll be a truck pick you up. I said, no, I'm not going to walk down that road for no 5 or 6 miles. I don't care if I never get home. He said, you just do what I tell you. Take your stuff and get out of here. And he said, he didn't say goodbye. I didn't have time to say goodbye to anybody or write the guys' names down so I could call them when I got home. I didn't have time to do nothing. So I picked up the stuff, and I started walking down the road. And I walked down that road for about a half a mile, and the truck picked me up. Took me to Naples, Italy. And took me in what they call a repo dep, where there's nothing but tents and soldiers going home. And I was there 3 days. I hadn't been paid for 2 or 3 months. Didn't have a dime in my pocket. So I went to town. I got a pass, and I went to town in Naples. And I'm walking down the street, and here's a Red Cross sign. And I thought, man, I'm going to go in there and see if I can get some money. So I go in there, and I tell them my story. And I said, now I need some money to go home. When I get home, I'll see that you get the money back. You don't have to give it to me. They said, Sergeant, we can't give you nothing but a pack of cigarettes. I said, I don't smoke. I don't smoke. I said, I thank you, and I left. And they never give me 5 cents, and I come all the way to the United States without a dime. And I got back into Camp Atterbury. I tell you another thing. After I got in this Repo Dep, I was there probably 2 days. And when I first got there, they had these 3 semis sitting. You walk in that door and you take off all your clothes. You go in and take a hot shower. You go in this next, you get all new clothes. Shoes, pants, everything. And that last one out, you get a haircut and a shave. When you walk out of there, you look like you're $1,000,000. Look like you just popped out of a... So then, and that's in this Repo Dep. And so then, I was there about 2 days, and they put me on a merchant marine ship. There's about probably a dozen guys on it. And these sailors was all merchant marines. And you talk about guys living. Those guys, man, they had bedrooms with white sheets on their beds. I said, man, you guys live like kings. And you talk about eat. They eat steak, and they had a guy on there could bake. They baked cakes, and all the way back to the United States, we stayed on this. It wasn't a very big ship, but there was probably, 35, 40 of us on there. But I was out on deck one day, and this sailor said to me, he said, Sergeant said, do you have any guns? And I said, yes, sir, I've got 6 German Lugers. And I said, I've been packing them for months, and I'm taking them home. And he said, well, I don't like to discourage you, but he said, when you get in the United States, they're going to search your stuff, and they're going to take them guns away from you. Well, I studied it for a few days, and I was out there one day, and he said, I'll buy them guns off of you. Well, I don't know what I sold. To this day, I don't remember what I sold them for. But I sold the guns, and when I got to New York, got off the boat, it wasn't a soul there. So they take me to this camp place, and they gave me a pass to go downtown New York. And I go downtown New York, and all these hawk shops had guns in them. These guys were buying these guns and then bringing them back, and while they was there, they was selling them. And I lost every one of them. And I had 5 brand new ones. They'd never been shot.
How did you get those guns?
Took them away from Germans. I always took their guns.
Yeah. How long were you in combat in Italy?
I don't know. I was in there a long time. It wasn't my time to die. It had not to be. I don't know how long I was there. I was there. I went in at Italy and went all through the mountains, and then I went into Austria. I was in that 91st Division for quite a while. I don't know. I never kept track of time. Now, I had a couple guys in my squad that they wrote down everything they did. Kept track of everything. I never did none of that, but I wished I had it today. They wrote down where they was, what town they was going through. If we'd go through a town, well, we'll say we went through a town like, Hope Sound. First thing we do, we'd go house to house and take all the guns away from everybody. Make sure they don't have nothing. Then if we wanted to walk down the street at night, we don't have to worry about somebody shooting at us. Now, I don't understand how they fight the war today. I don't understand it, and I talked to several fellas that been over, come back, that's real good friends of mine, and they said, we ought to be over there. And I said, I don't think so. They said, well, we need to be over there. I'll go back tomorrow if I can. But I don't understand how they fight a war today. That's just like you dividing these kids up and put them on one side of this building and give them guns, and put the other bunch on the other side and give them guns, and they're shooting at each other. Now, I don't understand that. I don't understand. But I talked to a couple guys about it, and they told me if you take the guns away from them, they'll just go out and get more. Said they're all been taught how to use guns and how to make bombs. He said a kid 5 and 6 years old is taught how to make a bomb. They don't know nothing else. Well, I said, I don't understand the war. I don't understand how they fight it, but it ain't nothing like we used to do. I know that.
Now, did you find mostly Germans and Italians, or just Germans?
When?
In your campaigns in Italy?
Yeah, you mean, yeah, we never, if we'd run on an Italian, they'd try to tell us where the Germans was at. They'd say, well, up the road, we had a couple guys that could talk it, and they'd get it out of them, but they'd tell us where they're at. So we'd be looking for them, see. And I never had an Italian to attack us, or they was usually waiting on us, and but for them to fight us back, no. All of them was Germans. The Russians, the United States come in on one side, and the Russians, they was mixing with them, and the Russians was taking their guns, taking their watches, taking their pocketbooks. Russia was never nice to the American soldier. There's always, that's the reason they built that wall. You remember the wall they used to have? Well, that's the reason the Russians built that. And the Russians, they never got along with us. They acted like they was on our side, but they never was. That's what I gathered from other guys, that I was not on that side of it, and I never got around any of them, but that's what I heard.
What type of soldier was the German?
Well, I'll tell you about a German. A German soldier didn't want to, the ones that I was close to, that I attacked, they didn't want to hurt you because they wanted to get home. They was just as interested in getting back home as you was. They were made to fight. Hitler made them do it. But the ones that I was around, after you got captured them, and I never, well, I was around a few that I never seen them, that done some pretty good deals, but I never was hand to hand with a German soldier as far as fighting them. I usually, if I captured one, that was it. Once I got a hold of him and got his gun away from him and searched him, he was done. And then I'd turn him over to somebody else. I didn't want no part of it. But a German soldier, I don't know, they didn't seem like they were real bad to me, but I had some guys that I was around that it wasn't easy. So that's about all I can tell you, and that's probably too much.
Yeah. How long were you overseas from the time you left?
I went in the Army in 1941, and I come back in 45. I come back, and I come to Camp Atterbury, and then they sent me home. Then they sent me out to Texas. I can't remember. I'm trying to think of there was a Army camp in Texas. And they sent me out there, and they put me in an outfit. Well, I'm saying they're kids, but I was a kid too. My 21st birthday I went in the Army at 19, and my 21st birthday I spent overseas. But I come back, and these kids, they're drafting them 18, 19 years old. And they put me in this outfit going to Korea. And these kids, they was drafting them, see. That's before the war was over. The war was over in Germany, but it wasn't over in Japan. So I'm saying Korea, and I'm sorry, I mean Japan. So they're going to send this outfit to Japan, and we're supposed to get them ready. Well, there was six of us in this bunch that come back, and there were guys that I never knew before, different companies that I'd met. They sent us out there, and they put us in a barracks, and there was 6, 7 guys in there, and they all come back from overseas. They're all sergeants, and so they put us in this outfit, and after we got in there, I was probably in there a month, and they called me in the order room one day, and they said, Sergeant said, do you know that you got enough points to get out of the Army? I said, I don't know. He said, yeah. See, then if you got so many points, you could get out. They said, you're eligible for discharge if you want it. Well, you're going to go overseas again if you don't. If you want to go, that's your business. Well, this first sergeant that was with me in this bunch was an old Army man. He'd been in the Army 12 years. And he said to me, why don't you go home on a furlough for 90 days? I'll fix it up. And I'll tell you where to come. And I'll promise you that you won't go overseas. You come go with me. And he said, I'll tell you where to come and what to do. And I said, I'll have everything set up for you. Well, I went home, but I never went back. But I made a mistake. If I had it to do over again, I'd go back and stay in. I had 3 years. Today I could be retired, but I'm already retired. I spent 30 years with the Snap-on Tool Company. Do you know about them? Well, I spent 30 years with them. That was and then I retired. I moved down here to Florida, and I've been down here for almost 20 years. I've had one heart attack. They say my heart ain't the best, but I go every day, and I enjoy everything I do, and I don't know, I'm just gonna take one day at a time.
Tell us about coming home.
Well, like I said, I come home and I gotta think how I got home. I know how I got home. I ended up in Camp Atterbury in Indianapolis, and I took a bus to home, and I went to this house where my wife lived. She'd been writing letters, and it was about 5 o'clock in the evening, and I got out of the taxi, and I could smell somebody. She was cooking supper. Boy, it was in the summertime. You could smell that supper. And I got out of the taxi, walked in there, and I said, is supper ready? And I walked in the kitchen. It wasn't my wife. The lady turned around and she started laughing. She said, your wife don't live here no more. She moved about a month ago. She said they sold the house to us, and she had to move. I could have went through the floor. So I asked her where she lived, and she told me. So I called a taxi back, and they took me home. Then I walked in the house, and so they wasn't looking for me. They didn't know that I had been, and I didn't call her up from Indianapolis and tell her I was coming. So she got all excited when I knocked on the door, and she come to the doorway. And then they got this little girl, 3 years old, she don't know you from Adam. She looks at you and runs and hides because she don't know who you are. But that's the way it worked out. I mean, then I stayed home. I don't know, I was home probably 30 days. Then they sent me back to Texas. Well, then after I got to Texas, after a while, my wife come down there, and we rented an apartment. And we rented there's a double, And this sergeant that I was telling you about wanted me to come back. He was in one side of this house and we was in the other. And we'd get up early in the morning and go out to post and do what we had to do, and then we'd come home of an evening. And we did that every day. We'd ride the street, ride the bus. They had buses there. Paris, Texas is where I come home. Where I went back to after I come home was in Paris, Texas, and it was I can't remember the name of the camp, but it ain't there now. And I'll tell you something else. After I got home, about 10 years ago, I took a trip to Oregon, and I went to Vancouver Barracks. They had tore it all down. There was houses built every place around where they still had the barracks there and part of it, but all the part that I was in, they built houses and tore it down. I made all that trip out there to see that place, and it wasn't there when I got there. So I said to my wife, there ain't no use me going where I used to be because it ain't there no more. But I made a trip clear out there in the place where I wasn't there anymore. So, but then after I got discharged, we took a train from Paris, Texas to Indianapolis. Then we took a bus to Anderson, which is a pretty big town in Indiana. Then we took a hometown bus from there into Elwood. And we already had a house there and furniture and everything, so we didn't have to, look for a place to live. But I come home and I tell you, you couldn't get it. Jobs were no good. You get a job, it was something nobody else wanted, didn't pay no money. And after I got home, I went to work at General Motors after a while, and that was a pretty good place. Made pretty good money. But I never made no money till I started working for myself. When I got with Snap-on Tool Company, things began to work out.
What do you think was the most valuable thing you learned in the service?
Well, I learned discipline because I was pretty wild. I learned discipline, and I learned how to handle people. And I don't know, I kind of enjoyed my Army life. Mm-hmm. I knew I had to be there. I knew I couldn't get out, so I just took it one day at a time. But what time I was in there, I enjoyed every bit of it.